They seemed like the perfect parents with the perfect family, a beautiful home, three adorable children, and smiles that lit up the neighborhood. But behind the walls of their suburban paradise, Sarah and Michael Calloway were hiding a chilling secret. When the truth finally came to light, it shocked an entire nation. What could turn loving parents into monsters? And how did their children survive a nightmare no one saw coming? This is the horrifying story of the worst mother and father ever. The Calloways were the kind of family others aspired to be. Their spacious colonial style home sat on a quiet, tree lined street with a garden meticulously maintained by Sarah, who always greeted neighbors with a warm smile. Michael was equally charming, a successful financial advisor with a reputation for being generous and personable. Their three children, Emma, Liam, and Chloe, were often seen playing in the yard or walking to school hand in hand, a picture of innocence and happiness. From the outside, their life seemed flawless, a beacon of stability in a chaotic world. But perfection is often an illusion, and for the Calloways, it was a carefully constructed facade hiding a sinister reality. Emma, the oldest, began showing signs of distress first. Once a bright and enthusiastic student, she became withdrawn and frequently missed school. Teachers noticed she flinched when touched and seemed overly anxious. Liam, normally outgoing and cheerful, started showing up to class with dark circles under his eyes and bruises on his arms. Chloe, too young to articulate what was happening, often looked frightened, her big brown eyes filled with a sadness that no child should bear. When concerned teachers and neighbors voiced their worries, Sarah had a ready explanation. The children were clumsy, she'd say, or they had caught a stomach bug, or she'd gush about how much they adored gymnastics and roughhousing. Her charm disarmed suspicions, and her quick excuses were enough to put everyone at ease, at least for a while. Behind closed doors, Sarah's obsession with control and Michael's need for dominance created a toxic environment of fear and abuse. The children were subjected to strict, almost militaristic rules. A spilled drink could result in hours of punishment. A poor grade might mean going to bed without dinner. Sarah justified her cruelty as discipline, while Michael's punishments escalated to terrifying extremes. The signs were there for anyone willing to look closely. Muffled screams at odd hours, the children's sudden aversion to visitors, and the drawn curtains that always shrouded the house in secrecy. A concerned teacher eventually filed a report with Child Protective Services after Emma appeared with a black eye and a fractured wrist. However, Sarah's manipulative charm once again came into play. During the investigation, she presented a spotless home and well-behaved children who had been coached to tell investigators everything was fine. The case was closed, leaving the Calloways free to continue their reign of terror. For their children, the worst was yet to come. The Calloway home, with its neatly trimmed hedges and freshly painted shutters, was the kind of house that blended seamlessly into the idyllic neighborhood. But inside, it was a prison. As the years went by, the control Sarah and Michael exerted over their children grew increasingly sinister. What started as harsh discipline soon spiraled into full-blown abuse, with punishments that became more severe and creative in their cruelty. The once lively Emma, Liam, and Chloe now lived in constant fear, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering their parents' wrath. Yet no matter how carefully they behaved, they couldn't escape the torment. The basement became the epicenter of the children's suffering. Sarah and Michael transformed it into a hidden dungeon, with padlocks on the doors and windows blacked out to ensure no light or sound could escape. Here, the children were sent as punishment for minor infractions. Talking back, not cleaning fast enough, or failing to meet unrealistic expectations. Emma, as the eldest, bore the brunt of the abuse. Her punishments were designed not only to hurt, but to humiliate, forcing her to endure hours of isolation in complete darkness. Liam and Chloe, though spared some of the worst treatment, were often forced to watch, their tears and pleading falling on deaf ears. Food was another tool of control. Meals became rewards rather than necessities, and the children were often left to starve if they angered their parents. Liam began scavenging scraps from the trash in desperation, only to be caught and beaten when discovered. Chloe, just 4 years old, developed a skeletal appearance that should have alarmed anyone who saw her, but the Calloways rarely let their children out of the house. Even when they did, Sarah applied makeup to cover bruises and dressed the children in long sleeves regardless of the season. The mental abuse was just as damaging as the physical. Sarah constantly belittled her children, calling them worthless and blaming them for her stress. Michael, meanwhile, instilled terror with his explosive temper, slamming doors and shouting threats that left the children cowering. The psychological toll was evident in the children's behavior. They avoided eye contact, rarely spoke unless spoken to, and became eerily obedient in the presence of others. Despite the mounting red flags, the Callaways maintained their pristine image. The community admired their strict but loving parenting style, never realizing the house they praised as a model home was in reality a house of horrors. One cold December night, Emma decided she couldn't endure the torment any longer. At just 10 years old, she made the boldest decision of her life: to escape the house of horrors that had become her prison. Emma had spent months secretly planning, observing when her parents were distracted and when the locks on the doors were left unguarded. That night, as Sarah and Michael argued loudly in the living room, she seized her opportunity. With trembling hands, she used a stolen screwdriver to loosen the screws on the basement window. The icy wind stung her face as she crawled through the narrow opening, scraping her knees and hands on the rough edges. But pain was the least of her worries. Her freedom was at stake. Emma stumbled barefoot through the snow-covered backyard, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Blood dripped from her cuts, leaving a faint trail in the snow as she sprinted toward the nearest house. Desperation fueled her every step as she reached the porch of her neighbors, the Millers. Banging on their door with all her remaining strength, she collapsed into their arms when they answered. Emma's frail, emaciated figure and haunted eyes were enough to alarm the Millers, but it was her whispered words that sent shivers down their spines. "Please help me. Don't let them take me back." The Millers immediately called the police, who arrived within minutes. Emma's condition shocked even the seasoned officers. Her thin frame, bruises, and bloody hands painted a picture of prolonged suffering. As paramedics rushed her to the hospital, officers made their way to the Calloway home. Sarah and Michael, caught off guard, tried to deny everything, spinning lies about Emma being troubled and difficult. But their carefully crafted facade began to crumble when officers searched the house. What they found in the basement was beyond anything they had imagined. Chains bolted to the walls, filthy mattresses on the floor, and a collection of tools that could only be described as instruments of torture. The stench of mold and decay filled the air, and evidence of the children's suffering was everywhere. Diaries hidden under loose floorboards revealed the horrific details of their abuse, with Emma's heartbreaking accounts describing years of pain and fear. That night, Sarah and Michael were arrested, and Liam and Chloe were placed into protective custody. For the first time in years, the Calloway children were free, but the damage done to their young minds and bodies would take a lifetime to heal. The trial of Sarah and Michael Calloway became a media sensation, drawing national attention as details of their horrific crimes surfaced. In the packed courtroom, the once charming couple now sat behind the defendant's table, stripped of their suburban facade. Sarah's cold, unfeeling demeanor unnerved even the most hardened reporters, while Michael's attempts to portray himself as a misunderstood father crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The prosecution presented a damning case, outlining years of abuse that turned the Calloway home into a living nightmare for their 3 children. The children's testimonies were the most gut-wrenching part of the trial. Emma, now 11 and living with a foster family, bravely recounted the horrors she had endured. She spoke of the nights spent chained in the dark basement, the starvation, and the constant fear of her parents' unpredictable rage. Her voice shook, but her resolve never wavered as she described the abuse she and her siblings faced. Liam, just 8 years old, struggled to hold back tears as he testified about the brutal punishments, recalling how he was beaten for trying to comfort Chloe when she cried. The youngest, Chloe, was deemed too young to testify, but medical reports and psychological evaluations spoke volumes about the trauma she had endured. The evidence was overwhelming. Photographs of the basement's torture chamber, detailed records of the children's injuries, and Emma's diaries painted a chilling picture of systematic cruelty. The defense's attempts to argue that the Calloways were merely strict parents fell apart under scrutiny. Their claims of innocence were contradicted by neighbors' reports of hearing screams, teachers' concerns about the children's condition, and the undeniable physical evidence found in their home. The jury took less than 2 hours to reach a verdict, guilty on all charges, including child abuse, neglect, and false imprisonment. Sarah and Michael were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a punishment that many felt was still too lenient for the atrocities they had committed. The judge's final words echoed in the silent courtroom. Your actions have left scars that will last a lifetime. You have failed not only as parents, but as human beings. Outside the courthouse, a crowd cheered as the verdict was announced. For the Calloway children, it was a small step toward justice, but their journey to healing was just beginning. Though their abusers were behind bars, the psychological scars would take years to mend, and their story would serve as a haunting reminder of evil hidden in plain sight. After the trial, the Calloway children faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives. Though Sarah and Michael were no longer a threat, the trauma they inflicted remained an inescapable shadow. Emma, Liam, and Chloe were placed into separate foster homes to allow each child to receive specialized care. The decision was made with their best interests in mind, as therapists believed they needed individual attention to process their experiences and begin the healing journey. For the first time in their young lives, they were surrounded by adults who truly cared for their well-being. Yet the road to recovery was anything but easy. Emma, the eldest, carried the heaviest burden. At just 11, she had assumed the role of protector for her siblings, and the guilt of not being able to shield them from their parents. Abuse weighed heavily on her. Nightmares and flashbacks haunted her, and trust was an alien concept after years of betrayal by the very people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. But Emma's resilience shone through. She poured her emotions into art therapy, sketching images that spoke volumes about her pain and survival. Over time, with the help of a compassionate foster family and dedicated counselors, she began to find her voice, using it to advocate for other abused children. Liam struggled to adapt to his new environment. At 8 years old, he had developed a deep mistrust of adults and a tendency to flinch at sudden movements. His foster parents worked patiently to build his confidence, encouraging him to express himself through play and writing. Liam found solace in journaling, often crafting stories about heroes overcoming insurmountable odds, perhaps a reflection of his own internal struggles. Though his journey was slow, each small step was a victory, from smiling more often to making friends at school. Chloe, the youngest, was too young to fully understand the extent of what had happened, but the fear and confusion lingered. She clung to her foster mother, terrified of being abandoned again. Through therapy, she began to feel safe and loved, her laughter gradually returning, a sound her foster family cherished as a sign of hope. The Calloway children's story became a rallying cry for reform in child welfare systems. Advocacy groups used their case to push for stricter oversight of abuse reports and better training for investigators. While the scars of their past would never fully fade, Emma, Liam, and Chloe proved that survival was possible, even in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Their story became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of compassion to heal even the deepest wounds.